Hazard Pay is a very unique take on the block-pushing puzzle genre, and in this video I'm going to be making some music for it.
Thanks for getting in touch with this. I have played the game a few times.
One thing I really wanted to do was I wanted to kind of have this emergent behavior where I come up with a list of items and they all interact with each other in some way.
But I was really impressed because I often struggle with these type of puzzle games because there's like one solution. You've got a very special mechanic in this one for kind of getting around that, right?
Quite often I'll solve a level in whatever 60 moves or whatever. My playtesters will do it in 40, and I don't know how, but they do.
Go on.
I have to also shout out, I have a Discord member called Red, and he made that one song actually that loops in the background just for the game, and I plan on giving him attribution, and that's a really cool contribution to the game.
So, after I'd had a good long chat with Arran about the sort of music he might want for his game, I gave myself the best part of a day. I started off with a bunch of little hi-hat sounds to give it that kind of skittering, creepy undertone that I got from the kind of Zerg tracks from StarCraft that would give it this kind of tension without it being a big, massive beat. And then I plugged my guitar in, basically just the effect setups that I've used for playing normal gigs, and started playing in a bunch of different stuff just to get a feel for the sorts of sounds and scales that would work for this. I kind of wanted to try and do something here that didn't sound really overly dark and didn't sound happy either, was somewhere in between.
The thing I really wanted to quiz you on a little bit is how do we want people to actually feel about this, right? And I found this meme that was this from your Discord.
I made the template and I made this one, yeah.
In your imagining of this world where these operatives are disposing of bodies in acid and stuff, how do they feel about it? These characters, are they totally desensitized to what they're doing? I think the music can emotionally suggest some of this stuff, so I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there definitely is a certain element of dread about it. So there's a routine. It starts as a routine, I would say, right? So it starts as pretty routine. You know, you've got an accident in the lab. You need to destroy some evidence there, maybe some documents, right? Something pretty benign. But as you get deeper and deeper into the facility, so you get deeper and deeper into this large conspiracy, I want the player to feel morally questioned. I want to kind of raise questions like, do you take the easy way, which is just be absolute brutal and destroy everything, or do you actually start to question your employer? But as the game progresses, I want to pose more and more questions.
This is what we want, this kind of tension between these two things of it's kind of mundane and you're desensitized to it, but there should be some kind of questioning or uncertainty. Because even that gives me quite a lot to work with, what you've just described of the kind of narrative arc of how you see this going. I think that's quite interesting.
I ended up with layers and layers and layers of sounds that I went through and color-coded and renamed, and then to chop them up even smaller like a hip-hop producer would do with samples and rearrange them, try and kind of build a piece that changed from one state to another, doesn't stay in one emotional space throughout the whole 4 or 5 minutes of this track. I wanted it to move back and forth between those to make it feel uneasy so that you kind of are pulled into a slightly more melancholy, sad sounds, and then back into that more dread-inducing, dark espionage sound.
When you're making music for a game, you've got to think about these three things, and one of them is like the obvious, like the setting and the theme, right? It's like, oh, it's a sci-fi game, so there are synthesizers. It's that kind of thinking. But then you've also got, how does the style of the gameplay influence the music? So the type of thing that you do when you're making music for a puzzle game or a strategy game, because the player isn't running around shooting things, right? The player is thinking.
Right, because you don't want to stress the player, right? Because there is no time limit. They can take as long as they need.
The player is pondering. So you kind of want that feeling of it's sort of building up to nothing all the time.
When I'm doing this kind of work, I don't think too hard, and I try to do things by creating patterns and then breaking those patterns. Keep a reasonably consistent flow behind the game. So I don't want to have any massive changes where it's suddenly blaring at you, but I do want to have enough changes that it still kind of feels interesting and doesn't kind of grate on you by being too repetitive. The guitar is my main instrument. It's what I have more control with, so I like to kind of base everything around that first. So I will be adding synthesizers using the keyboard, but I will get as much sound as I can out of the guitar first, especially in the case of this project where we want the whole thing to sound a bit dirty and a bit grungy and a bit like it's like 40, 50-year-old piece of music. Using the guitar really helps to get that sound organically without me having to add loads and loads of digital effects to a synth, which is what I'll be doing soon once I've structured these initial guitar samples into something I find interesting.
I don't know if you've heard many of Trent Reznor's soundtracks, but he did all of the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo music and dark ambient synth stuff. And I think that's kind of what you've got, but it's quite clean at the moment.
I can see that. Yeah.
So if we can get a bit of this vibe in here, this is called like Abandoned 80s Mall.
Totally been there, eh? When I'm like programming, you want some vaporwave,
yeah,
to keep you going forever.
This kind of espionage funk type thing that you get from crime movies, where there's like wah-wah guitar or like a jazz flute. I want to try and explore it, even if it's sort of hidden in the background a bit. That will just give it a bit more of the kind of dirtiness that is suggested by the theme.
Yeah, and I think it's also to add a little bit of humor, right? Or a little bit of strangeness. Occasionally put in bodies in acid, or there are places where you maybe tie up a scientist, and do you take him with you or do you dispose of him for convenience? I mean, it's kind of up to the player.
I also used a little trick that I use quite a lot where I program in a rhythm into a drum machine like this, and then I play the rhythm and cycle through the different presets of the drum machine and play around with effects and stuff, and then basically record the whole thing I'm doing. So it's very messy and sometimes leads to happy accidents and little loops that I can chop out and use in different places. Quite a nice way to use those presets of those drum machines in a way that allows for those kind of happy accidents, allows for things to happen by mistake. I use a similar method when I'm using synths, rather than just recording the MIDI data so I can always go back and change everything I do. A lot of the time I'll set my synth and my effects up as if I was using an analog old school synth, not on a computer, and I record me messing around with it loads of times, and that's why you can see so many waveforms on here that represent these pieces I've recorded, and I now can't change them. I can add effects on top of them, but I can't go through and change the notes unless I chop them out and move them around individually, which is different from working with MIDI like this. Now that's a very destructive workflow that a lot of people wouldn't advise you do. Putting yourself in a position where you can't go back and edit stuff too much can be quite good, because you either have to use what you've got or you have to just delete it and make something else. And that's why I use these kind of very destructive workflows. I guess it's the audio equivalent of making something in Photoshop and you keep like flattening everything and you keep rendering all the masks and you don't give yourself undo steps. It might not be for everyone, might not be something that everyone likes to do, but I find this is really helpful when I'm making music, particularly this kind of atmospheric textural stuff where the melody is quite simple, but I want the sound of, the kind of knobs being turned and the effects being played around with, and certain degree of randomness. I want that baked in so I can't do anything with it later and I have to use that slightly messy version of the file.
I'd love to share how I got in contact with you. Maybe if that would be really cool. So I created the game in a game jam called Ludum Dare, which is 48 hours you create a game, and that's how this all started. I'm still using the same base. I just kept on building, which has problems, but many refactors later. And I was looking at an open game out. I've been using that site for years, and I stumbled upon your track. It just fit perfectly, right? So I thought I'd reach out to you on LinkedIn and say, maybe get an extra vote in the Ludum Dare and say, hey, look, hey Joe, I found your track and I used it in my game.
You heard it here first, guys. To get more votes in Ludum Dare, use 12 people's music.
Exactly. I'd never received such positive feedback from a game jam entry. And I watched some people on Twitch play it, and it was just such a great feeling to see people enjoy this kind of twisted and dark concept. So I thought I can get it finished in a year. I was still wrong, but I'm happy. I'm happy it's small like this, and I think I'm confident I can finish it.
Basically got to a point where I had a very colourful mess like the one you can see here. I have a particular way that my brain understands the relationship between sound and colour. It's not synesthesia. I think I'm just autistic in a very specific way. If you don't make music, even just looking at this as a sort of pattern recognition exercise, you can see there's not much repetition, right? Whereas if I was making a pop song, there would be a verse, a chorus, and you'd see lots of repetition, whereas we don't have that here. And if I just press play now and take you through it, that kind of skittering drum backbone is this top row that goes all the way through the track. You can see some bits where it drops out. We've got our bass picking that bow 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 there. We've also got a layer of like these sort of recorded drums again, where I'm jumping through different presets in the drum machine to see what they do. And that's why there's that kind of falling down the stairs drum fill in there somewhere. Now, I might not leave that exactly where it is. I might move that somewhere else in the song, but it's quite cool. And there's a big like distorted reverb on that drum channel as well, which is why it sounds so like so gritty and sort of metallic and industrial. Got these layers of wah-wah you can see here. And to give it that kind of real sleazy film noir vibe, it's where these vibraphones come in. There are certain types of instruments that you just can't make a good digital version of. Like reed-based blown instruments are very hard. It's quite hard to get the articulation right on strings. But things like this, mallet instruments, the digital versions, most people wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Just kind of this kind of sleazy sounding, much more retro sounding instrument in with all of this electronic. So you can kind of see the track concept here. We've got a mix of sounds I would call like spy movie soundtrack sounds, like the wah guitar and the vibraphone. That guitar's a little bit harsh. Just going to take some top off that electric guitar because it's a little bit harsh. I might come back and re-record some of the electric guitars later because some of them are a bit nasty. The beat doesn't loop in fours like you would expect it to, which makes it quite confusing when you pay attention to it, and that's what I want. It does get a bit more kind of consistent later on. So this first section, we've got this kind of creepy, spies sneaking around section of the song, and then everything drops down into something a bit more emotional, and we've got these big synths, and it sounds a bit like something from like the Blade Runner soundtrack. This is very, very mid-80s sci-fi movie music. So we go from the sneaky espionage movie sound into this brief moment of like epic, or you're in a big cool city kind of maybe utopian even sound, and then drop back down, back into our sneaky. And from here, you see all this orange, all these hot sounds. This is where, in a moment, we're going to drop into kind of pure synthwave, really. And then we'll bring back in some other parts of the track, like the vibraphones and stuff. But once we go into this synthwave section, it's kind of progressive, and it just continually does this kind of for most of the rest of the song. And you can see these lines are automations. So if you know video but you don't know film, this is exactly the same as kind of things in video where you can fade things in and out, but you can do it with effects. So for example, the synths that are playing now, I'm gradually taking the top end off of one of them so that it gets thinner and thinner and sort of sinks into the background, so it can keep looping but it becomes less prominent. And that's kind of how you keep a very repetitive progressive track going without having to fully take parts out. You can just sort of gradually push them into the background. And that's you can hear we brought the vibraphone part back in. This loop here, I might have to make sure I use that in more places because it's very ominous and it sort of sounds like a robot laughing, and I kind of think that fits the mood of the game very well. sort of sinister, but a little bit kind of goofy as well.
Yeah, and you've got a level editor now, right? So are you seeing community maps already?
Yeah, I did have a couple, and they're like way too difficult for me. They're like, I'm like, when I'm building the levels, I'm thinking about the order where it will be. You know, let's introduce this concept or let's reinforce this. I like to play like a Discord level, and it's like 50 doors. They push that item, it causes this like Ruby Goldberg machine, and it's like impossible to understand.